Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And that brings us to a title which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1205. And this is a Blu-ray release which was made earlier this year of a film which is described as being from the year 2017. And the name of the filmmaker is Dee Rees. And the name of the film is MUDBOUND. This is the work, the incredibly poetic work that is so multi-textured and has a intricate multi-perspective structure to it that lends itself, I think, to an incredibly moving poetic landscape, cinematic landscape, so literary in sweep and scope, and so intimate in nature that it is an all-encompassing, incredibly moving experience. From the filmmaker Dee Rees, a novel by Hilary Jordan, and then the screenplay adaptation by Virgil Williams and Dee Rees. And then we have the director being Dee Rees, director of photography Rachel Morrison, and production designer David Bomba, and costume designer Michael Boyd, and others. And we'll talk a little bit more about the some aspects of the production and people on the crew when we talk about some of the supplements, some of the great supplements, by the way. So, but also with respect to the actors and performers, a wonderful assembly of actors here. For example, we have Carey Mulligan and Jason Clarke and Garrett Hedlund, Jonathan Banks, Rob Morgan, Jason Mitchell, Mary J. Blige, and others who are gathered here to tell these stories of these two families that are connected by the soil, earth, and mud, and other things in this work, which is MUDBOUND. So, MUDBOUND is the 2017 work from Dee Rees, and it is another Dee Rees film in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog, which is wonderful. It reminds us, of course, of the earlier release from, I think, a year or so back of the Dee Rees film Pariah. And I think we've had the great opportunity to talk a little bit about the Pariah Criterion release on this channel, in fact. So that is also, I think, a wonderful way into the world, the cinema world, the art of Dee Rees. And here is another continuation of that in this wonderful, really stirring, moving film. It is also a Netflix film, so this is yet another indication of the ongoing, or we hope ongoing, continuing relationship in physical media parlance between Netflix on the one hand and Criterion on the other. So here we have another example of this being MUDBOUND. So a lot, I think, to say about this work, and a lot to say about the contents of this Criterion release. It's a really great release with a number of supplements as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video discussion. But before we get to that, my dear friends, let us, you and I, first speak a little bit about the plot or story structure of this work, MUDBOUND. And I think if we were to endeavor to do so, I think we would focus in on these two families, these two characters, or these two groups of characters that are intertwined, both in terms of geography and space, and indeed certain, say, thematic and maybe even historical context or sweep of history. So we have the McCallan family on the one hand, which is represented by the characters portrayed by Jason Clarke and Carey Mulligan. This is Henry and Laura, and also Pappy, and then the father figure, and then also we have the brother figure as well. And this is the Jamie character, so Garrett Hedlund. And so already within that context, we have a number of things going on. Oh, and this is set against the context in the backdrop of of a mid 20th century United States, so wartime, World War II, and also immediately after World War II, in the Mississippi Delta area, for the most part. We have some introductory scenes taking place, I understand, in Memphis, and to exemplify a type of cosmopolitan lifestyle in Memphis at the time, which is also set in contrast to the situation of the farm and the in the Mississippi Delta region in which this film is located. It's shot, actually, the actual locations are in slightly different places, which we'll talk about in the supplements discussion. But that's the context of the story, and so already have a really stark contrast between quote unquote, the living the life in terms of the soil and earth and mud. Hence, I think one aspect of the title, Mudbound. And it is really gritty and very stark, and almost a type of difficult living conditions that are depicted, living on the land itself and trying to earn a living off of the land, with all the sort of hardships and maybe the failures and mishaps that the Jason Clarke character Henry seems to undergo. And we see him as being a type of a fallible character, someone who is prone to mishap and mistakes and lack of proper judgment, etc., that has certain ramifications for his father, the Pappy character, and also Laura, his wife, Carrie Mulligan character, and also their family, as well as his brother, his relationship with his brother. And here we have a number of things going on in terms of potential, say, romantic tensions that might exist in terms of the love triangle that might emerge among Henry and Jamie, and then Laura, and also Pappy, who is already early on displaying some very stubbornly and rigidly and disturbing tones of racism. And those tones, I think, are also becoming even more prominent as the film progresses, because we understand that this is yet one side of the literary, or the character arc coin of this film. The other side, of course, being the Jackson family. And this is we understand that the essay, which is part of the great booklet, which I have here, makes a point of distinguishing their status as shared tenants with respect to this land, which I think was an interesting detail of the essay. And we'll talk about the essay in a minute, or later on in this video. But in any event, we have the Jackson family. So this is Florence and Hap, and also Florence and Hap, and Rob Morgan and Mary J. Blige character, and they have a large family and they are also working the land as well, and so there is a type of uneasy yet essential relationship that is blossoming and emerging between the Jackson family on the one hand and the McCallum family on the other. And it has to do with their needs in terms of working the land. Maybe there is also an uneasy relationship that is very much deeply affected by sort of racist attitudes that are expressed throughout this film as being prevalent in the context of the stories that we see exhibited here. And we also see the hardships of the Jackson family in terms of the limitations economically as well as socially, but also the sort of hopes and aspirations that this family has, and that the patriarch and matriarch figures have for their younger generation children growing up, in terms of their own dreams, in terms of maybe land ownership and development, and dreams and aspirations which are hinted at, especially early on, as well as what happens to the younger generation. They try to encourage their children. There's one moment where one of the children expresses her wish to become a stenographer, which is a lovely touch, and Dee Rees actually mentions this in other parts of the supplements, which we'll talk about as well. So that's one example in terms of their encouragement of their family. And then there's also one of the other key figures, their son, This is Roncel, and the Roncel character played by Jason Mitchell. And here we have yet another wonderful link that is established, or I should say, a link that is established that creates yet a furtherance of a type of closeness of the close-knit nature of these families that is maybe even closer than they might even immediately realize. That is the two sons, as it were, or maybe in the context of the McCallum family, the brother, the Garrett Hedlund character. This is Jamie. He goes to war. Serves in the military in World War II, as well as Roncel. So Roncel from the Jackson family also goes and serves his military service, and they serve very honorably. We see aspects of their service and really quite grisly and frightening moments in wartime and in battle, and quite grisly, quite violent, and very bloody, and very shocking to them. And so we realize immediately that there is also this tension and also the reckoning with dealing with the circumstances involving wartime and battle and the trauma that they both are exhibiting when they return from their wartime experiences, and each having their own different experiences but also seemingly similarities as well. I mentioned this aspect of wartime trauma that seems to be expressing itself through various forms of, say, quote unquote social or quote unquote antisocial behavior, end quote. And I use air quotes in that because it is very much a something that is a very personal and intimate journey that each of these characters, Roncel and Jamie character respectively, they each go on, and it's we see sometimes the rough parts of it. Sometimes there's a reaction in the community. The community sees that maybe the community who doesn't know war directly is maybe not aware of and perhaps is dismissive of, but we are privy to Jamie's experiences and Roncel's experiences to a certain degree as viewers of the film, and so we know the types of trauma, emotional trauma that they are experiencing, and perhaps because of this feeling of emotional isolation, in other words, they aren't able to share their experiences with other people in the community except for each other. And here, as I say, lies what I described earlier as being a wonderful connection, because that forms the potential bond between Jamie on the one hand and Roncel on the other. And so here we have families that have an uneasy relationship with each other or uneasy ties with each other. There are aspects of race and prejudice that are also involved in that uneasy connections. But here we have a powerful bond that emerges between Jamie and Roncel in the scenes where the two of them are together and sharing discussions and the like. And so there also is the opportunity window to see into their own stories as well. For instance, Roncel, in terms of his wartime experiences, we also understand that he he had certain intimate relationships with people there, and also he experienced certain aspects of race and race relations that, from his viewpoint, it forms a stark contrast with how he perceives those race and race relationships when he returns to his home here in the Mississippi Delta. So that's one aspect of his own personal journey that has, I think, rippling ramifications when he comes home on the one hand, and also Jamie too, his own dealing and grappling with trauma coming back makes him sit uneasy perhaps with the way that things are happening in the household with Henry and Pappy and Laura. But also there is this continuing maybe sibling rivalry and also tension that I mentioned earlier has something to do with his maybe hidden feelings and emotions with Laura that may or may not be reciprocal. And then you throw into the mix there their own relationship, Jamie and Roncel, and how that brings about certain almost tempestuous forms of racist attitudes, and it's, I think, brought to the fore quite directly and quite viciously in how the character of Pappy is intertwined into the plot, and how that develops and further develops and even further develops into certain, say, plot details or plot points that sort of lead to a kind of inexorable conclusion. So this is, I think, to try to describe the sweep and flow of this film Mudbound in this, I think, very epic way, and also is able quite masterfully to maintain a sense of the intimate and personal. And it does so through a number of means, but one of the primary means, I would say, is it is able to capture the sweep of, say, the scope of time and space, while also capturing the intimate by maintaining multi perspectives. And so we have various points where different characters are given the chance to give us their inner monologue. And so we hear the voiceover monologue of given characters along the way. And sometimes they can be very quiet, very contemplative, sometimes hopeful, sometimes morose, sometimes optimistic, sometimes maybe contemplative of the moment. And so they are very poetic passages as well. And so this gives us, I think, a kind of sense of quiet poetic serenity that I think can be interpreted in a very maybe a multitude of ways. And so this allows, for instance, say certain passages from the mother, Florence character, and the Mary J. Blige character, and how she is coming to the understanding about how her son Roncel is going to, say, live his life in the world with or without his family, etc., and then how that might affect her relationship with Hap, her husband, the matriarchal figure, the Rob Morgan character. And then we have moments where Hap's own inner monologue comes to the fore, and we understand his feelings about the land and the soil, and the idea of the importance of the work, but also the real difficulties and the struggles that entails, and how that is very much part of the fabric of his own story and his own legacy, and what it is he's trying to protect, which is his family, as well as his outreach in terms of the community, and in terms of his work as a pastor, and outlook on God and religion. I also should point out too that Florence, the Mary J. Blige character, has this interesting background in terms of a certain degree of medicinal knowledge, which comes also to the fore in the furthering relationship between the Jackson family on the one hand and the McCallan family on the other. So those are two examples of the sort of the voiceover narration, which we see also emerge with other of the key characters. I mentioned Jamie and Roncel, but also Henry and Laura. Henry and Laura being another of the key couples here, the crucial key couples, the Carey Mulligan character and the Jason Clarke character. And we have aspects of their outlook on their current status. I mean, another interesting through line is the character arc of Laura coming from a certain point of her life, maybe admittedly somewhat sheltered, and admittedly somewhat kind of sheltered, and a life of maybe, relatively speaking, a life of luxury, and then, but not necessarily spoiled in a way, because she also has a type of worldly sensibility about her that comes to that comes about in certain key maybe moments of plot or subplot in this film, key moments of crisis even, where she is shown to be quite, I think, decisive in a very confident sort of way, but also trying to deal with the certain aspects of lack of privacy, and her very, very difficult relationship with her father-in-law, and also her relationship with Henry, which is sort of on again, off again type of relationship, and she expresses that as well in terms of an emotional connection, in terms of a physical or sexual connection, and then the feelings that she has towards the Jackson family, as well as the feelings that she has towards Jamie, and so all that becomes this emotional swirl that is, I think, expressed, I think, so vividly through those aspects of this sort of directness and inner monologue. And so I think this highlights a really intricate structure that preserves and respects a lot of the perspectives of the characters, which then holds its own, or hold their own, as we progress through the plot. And the plot indeed can get quite intense. There are moments of real intensity and unsettling nature that we are privy to. And then we also come to understand too that there is a really kind of interesting temporal structure that is at play here, even when we consider the opening moments of this and how we cut over sort of in almost an elliptical manner certain passages, but also our understanding of how these maybe shifts in time also aren't without sort of the emotional luggage that is definitely due and prone that these characters are prone to. So I think all in all, it's a really marvelous emotional package of a film that is very sweeping, but also very intimate at the same time, which I think is a very difficult balance to achieve. But this film does it quite remarkably indeed. So there are also aspects of the production that I think are really quite remarkable, which we'll also talk about maybe with a bit more detail in the supplements discussion. But things like how this film was actually made. There's location shooting, was real locations, and so we weren't talking about studio or set created studio work, but it was actually getting into the earth and the roughness of the environment, which I think is also part of the sort of aesthetic feel of the film. I mean, you need to feel the mud and the puddles of water and the bugs and also the cracks in between the planks of wood that the wind goes, those sorts of feelings. Those are all present there because they were actually there in terms of the actual shooting feel of the shooting approach of the film, which is incredible. And then we have aspects of the shooting, or aspects of also the production design, to how some of the buildings were not just actual historical buildings, but they were used in a way that was actually quite remarkable, which we'll also talk about in the supplement section. And then the performances. I mean, I mentioned already the great sort of whirlwind of plot points and character perspectives, and it held together by the wonderful edited structure and also the inner monologue structure, but also that is due to the greatness of the cast. I mean, these performances are top notch across the board, top notch. And I think what's so great about it is that there's also a kind of ensemble feeling about it. So they're all shining in their own way, but none, I think, overshines the other. And so there's such a great, perfect balance that I think is struck between and among all these premier, top of the line performances. So Carey Mulligan's performance, Jason Clarke's performance, and there's a kind of struggle there, and it's almost tempting to maybe not like Jason Clarke's character, but he makes his character, his Henry, very likable in a kind of unlikable way. You know what I mean? He tries to do the right thing, but sometimes that is not always the right thing. But maybe he can't help it, etc. Maybe he is more of a victim than he might let on. It's the same thing too for Carey Mulligan's Laura. I like how there's a certain sense of muted confidence on the one hand, but also a sense of frustration on the other. And that also brings to her characterization a real sense of nuance too. We might think that, or she might think that what she is doing is something that is very decisive and very beneficial, but there might be some ramifications along the way, certain steps that she might take that might suggest a sense of maybe possible interpretations of betrayal or a lack of trust as well. So I like how these characters are moving in areas that really allowed for degrees of nuance that again preserve a sense of the sort of the multi-dimensional aspect of these characters. And the same is true for the Mary J. Blige performance. There is a kind of calm serenity, but also when those moments of worry occur, there is a kind of a stoicism that is almost tragic in a way. I mean, there's a moment early on in the film where we see her and the family saying goodbye to Roncel as he's going off to war, and we see her and how she reacts at the moment that he's leaving. I mean, it's one of those powerful moments. Again, it's suggestive of a kind of stoic tragedy, or stoicism in tragedy. Let's put it that way. Which is, it's a kind of a towering performance. And then for Florence, and then her relationship with Hap, who is portrayed by Rob Morgan. This is another of the towering performances here. And there is a kind of sense of the struggle and also the withholding or keeping at a distance. But even that keeping at a distance never creates a wall between us, the viewer, and his performance. We know and we feel everything, even those unspoken moments. It's all registered in his face and in his physicality, which is supremely brilliant. And then Garrett Hedlund's performance and Jason Mitchell's performance. My goodness! So Jamie and Ronzel, their bond, their kind of struggle, and they kind of come from a slightly different generation or different circumstances. And so those different circumstances really show or shine forth, not just in terms of the war or post-war trauma that they're both experiencing in their own respective ways, but also how they're trying to deal with the community in their own ways. And so they also, in their performances, show this deep linked frustration and also maybe lack of clarity that they feel after coming home, but also trying to seek something, seek some kind of maybe almost defiant resistance, but doing it in a way that is also very subtle and very nuanced. And so they each bring their top game, their A game, to the table in such a powerful way. So across the board, the performances are utterly stellar. And then under the guiding hand of the direction of Dee Rees, and just the sheer confidence and a majesty of the sweep of the film, while still never losing sight of who these characters are and what their personal stories are, and the through lines that are always maintained. This is utterly compelling from start to finish. So I'm very happy that this has been released by Criterion. I was able to see this film before the Criterion release. I caught up with it somewhat later after the film had been released, so not at 2017, but somewhat later. But actually, much later, in fact. But prior to the Criterion release. But I was so fascinated by it. What I loved about it too was there is a way in which the entry point into this film, I think, is there's a real ease of entry into this. I'm not a history student. I'm not a history expert by any stretch, and so I'm not an expert when it comes to 20th century American history, for example. But even my lack of information and my shallow grasp of an understanding of history didn't prevent me, at least I think, from entering into this world in a very, I think, easy manner. I think that is due to all the elements that I was trying to stress before, under the guiding hand, the brilliantly guiding hand of Dee Rees. And it's great to have another Dee Rees film in the collection in this wonderful Blu-ray in 2024. So this is the film, which is Mudbound. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Mudbound, which is the 2017 film, here in this Blu-ray edition at spine number 1205. And this is described as being the director-approved Blu-ray special edition, new 2K digital master supervised by director Dee Rees and director of photography Rachel Morrison, with Dolby Atmos soundtrack as well. So we have this release here to grace our Blu-ray shelves for those who are interested. I should point out that the booklet doesn't indicate any further notes about the master or the transfer or anything like that. And so I just point that out. I think the only notes or the only remarks about the materials used for this presentation are set forth on the back of the Blu-ray case, which is what I've just read out right now. So I should point out, I mean, this I understand was made on digital, and this point will be discussed when we talk about some of the supplements, especially focusing in on the director of photography Rachel Morrison, the choice to choose to shoot on digital, sort of the necessity for shooting on digital, etc. So that's going to be spoken about as well. And then also I understand that this is a relatively speaking recent release from the last few years, so 2017. So I think for those reasons primarily, I could assume, therefore, that maybe there isn't much need to make any note about the master or transfer or any sort of film preservation related notes to make because of the nature of how this was made itself. So I can probably assume that that's the case. In any event, I think for me, I've never seen this in the theater. I've never seen it projected in a wide screen or anything like that. I've only seen it on my TV screen. Either playing here, not on this TV, but actually in a different room. I think there is a kind of uh, a way that this feels, and this is remarked upon in some of the supplements, some of the, like the commentary and elsewhere, how they were trying again out of necessity. Dee Rees and Rachel Morrison and company and the producers, they had a limited amount of time in terms of the shooting schedule and then budgetary concerns, and so that meant that they had to make a choice whether to shoot on film and then sacrifice a certain number of days for shooting, or whether they could keep those days but then shoot on digital, which therefore I assume that the budgetary concerns would be that you could there could be a little bit more allowance if the choice was on digital, and that was a hard choice for a director and cinematographer to make, apparently. So because there's a way that the filmmakers wanted or felt that this type of story, with all of its, maybe for lack of a better phrase, for all of its William Faulkner-like elegance and literary sweep to it, the World War II and post-World War II feel and the mud, etc. This maybe maybe it was a film that was designed or was made to be made on film rather than on digital. But on the other hand, what Dee Rees and Rachel Morrison were able to do was they were able to create a work that, again, their concept as described in some of the supplements was to show a work that felt film-like, and I think they created that quite marvelously. There is a way which it doesn't look overly, say, digitally saturated. Let me put it that way. You know, in my own sort of in my own very limited parlance, perhaps, or non-expertise type of parlance, but it doesn't feel digitally saturated. It feels, I think, very much, the depth feels like a type of preserved depth, or the way in which people standing in one part of the frame, and then they look out into the distance, because there are a lot of moments where there's a wide vista and wide expanse, things in the foreground, things in the background, and sky, and open sky, and I think those, and not just that, the way in which the environment, the weather, sometimes it's shining and bright and sunny, and sometimes that heat can be quite oppressive, and you're meant to feel that. And other times you can have the rain and the relentless nature of the rain and the dark clouds, etc. So, and then how that affects and the wind, etc. This is also very much important. I think those aspects are captured very well, and so I think in any event, the choice to shoot this in digital, I think, was a very, I mean, it shows off quite splendidly in the final product, both in terms of how it looks and how it sounds. And so, in any event, those points, I think, are preserved quite well when watching this on the Blu-ray here. So, kudos to everyone concerned for the way that this looks and sounds for this Criterion release. And so now I have the Blu-ray in the machine right now, and so it is actually playing on the monitor as I speak, but please note that the Blu-ray menu is one of these menus where you have moving images, pictures, edited, montaged, edited shots from the film. And so just just in case, just to be on the safe side, so that I don't potentially offend the copyright gods at YouTube, I want to just block out the screen here so as to not show that. So unfortunately I can't show what the Blu-ray menu is, but it's a really nice and tender type of quality to it. So if you do get this release, and I recommend that you do, please check out the Blu-ray menu as well. So this is very nice. But the reason why I brought this up is that let's talk about the supplements. And the first thing I want to talk about is the commentary track. So this film, or this release by Criterion, includes a commentary track, and it's described like so. This commentary track featuring director Dee Rees was recorded exclusively for the Criterion Collection in 2023. To listen to the commentary while viewing the movie, press the audio key on your remote at any time. So this is the Dee Rees commentary track. And this is a film that is, I think, really much, it kind of has a sweep and scope to it. And also really interesting production history to it, which I think is very much on display when Dee Rees is speaking about it in a very welcoming manner, a very down-to-earth manner about speaking. I really love Dee Rees's explanation and anecdotes about the film, and about how she came to the material to begin with, some of the aspects of working with, sort of adapting this work. Again, the underlying maybe script adaptation, Virgil Williams' work on it, and then of course the novel by Hilary Jordan. And this goes into some details about some aspects of similarity and difference, and how she was trying, Dee Rees was trying to maybe try to capture some of the spirit of the novel and the structure of novel, but also trying to figure out how to then preserve that in a way that would also maintain a sense of respect and room for each of the characters. And that dawned upon her, and also working with her editor, Mako Kamitsuna, who will also be featured elsewhere in the supplements, by the way, how this created this opportunity to establish this wonderful multi-perspective structure to this film that allowed for all these inner monologues to take place for the main characters. And there are some moments where Dee Rees says about certain aspects or certain things where she wrote herself, maybe certain passages from Hap's, say, sermons, etc., or some of the passages of the monologues themselves. She'll make it a point about where she actually wrote that in order to give further echoes of voice to those characters, for example. And then also some details about even the background, and how certain details of the background, like the extras that are moving in, and some of the details surrounding, say, the clothing or the fashion details, were also trying to, in her mind and her way, be suggestive in this direct, indirect way, suggestive of certain aspects of race and racial relationships and race relations and racial identity in this period, mid 20th century Mississippi Delta period area. So this is really important in terms of everything that is in the frame has some kind of meaning or purpose or objective, which I think is quite wonderful indeed. Also, she does speak too about the nature of the performances. There's an interesting anecdote that's mentioned. It's here and also I think elsewhere in the supplements about working with, say, Mary J. Blige, for instance, and how the name Mary J. Blige, it's just so famous that it brings with it, I think, a lot of expectations. So there is this interesting way of Mary J. Blige and Dee Rees to approach the character of Florence, the character that she plays, and how there is an interesting way that it's almost an interesting, almost defying expectation, while also showcasing it's again one of the towering performances of the film. But at the same time, there's an interesting anecdote that appears where Dee Rees is talking about how some of the children in the Jackson, who are portraying the children in the Jackson household, some of those performers, they were actually on location working with Mary J. Blige playing Florence, their mother, and they didn't realize that it was Mary J. Blige, but then they realized that they became so excited. Oh my goodness! So it's an interesting anecdote about how that realization set in for some of the performers who didn't realize that they were working with the Mary J. Blige. But I think it's a testament to the kind of depth of power of her performance. It's really powerful performance. And also Rob Morgan. Rob Morgan is mentioned here. Rob Morgan, that Dee Rees had worked with before in other Dee Rees projects, and now in a key role of Hap. And so yeah, these, and then there are also some details about the houses and the house and the location shooting, and about how the houses were actual houses that were used, that were back from these times. And so there's a kind of almost chilling link to a historical past that's already embedded in the actual houses that these stories or the film is using, which is itself, I think, a brilliant way of using historical artifact and also preserving historical artifact from a certain perspective for purposes of making this film. And also using that, and there's a story about how they wanted to use, the production wanted to use a house that they could, but they just need to move the location of the house to somewhere more inland into the farmland itself for purposes of the plot or maybe sort of thematic rendering of the film. So there's an interesting notion about moving the house, etc. So these are part of the production design details that are, I think, overall encompassing this really brilliant work. So Dee Rees, her commentary track is splendid. It's brilliant, and so please check it out if you can. It's a recent one. It says it's exclusive to the Criterion Collection release, so we're getting a new commentary track with this. So it's amazing. So please check out this film with the commentary track if you have the opportunity. And next, let us turn our attention to the supplements of this film. And so the supplements can be found on the supplements menu, which is one of the sub-menus of the Blu-ray main menu. So you take a look here, and then down below the option for commentary, you can find the option for supplements. And so you press that, and then you've got a number of supplements that are listed here. So the first one that's listed is called Take It When You Got It, which is, I think, something that is that we hear Dee Rees say during some of the footage that's part of the supplement, which is a really cool way of titling this. But in any event, this program, it's described as, this program features behind-the-scenes footage from the set of MUDBOUND and interviews with director and co-screenwriter Dee Rees, co-screenwriter Virgil Williams, author Hilary Jordan, executive producer Charles King, producers Tassian Elwes, Carl Effinson, Sally Jo Effinson, and Kyle Tequila. Actors Carey Mulligan, Mary J. Blige, Rob Morgan, Jason Mitchell, Jason Clarke, Garrett Hedlund, and Jonathan Banks, and other cast and crew. This is approximately 24 minutes, and so it is an assembly of, say, footage that's shot as the creators are making this film on the locations that are being selected. We understand too that the locations that were selected were primarily locations in Louisiana, and it's an interesting thing too that the filmmakers, Dee Rees in particular, acknowledges the cultural differences between Louisiana on the one hand and Mississippi on the other, and yet still there were aspects of reasons why Louisiana or some of the Louisiana locations were selected. One of them being, I think, because there were more locations that were suggestive of this historical period that they could find in Louisiana that were made available for them in Louisiana. Although there's an interesting detail about this, about the farming itself, which we'll talk about in a separate supplement to this. But in any event, also what's emerging here, I'm sorry, the structure of this too is such that I'm getting way ahead of myself because I'm very excited about this. This is a great supplement, but it's not just an assembly of behind the scenes location footage, but also interviews, one-on-one interviews with many of the interview participants, the interviewees, most of them being taking place on location. So maybe they're on location and they're being interviewed off, maybe in between takes or something like that. I think except Dee Rees is interviewed maybe in a separate room perhaps, although we do see Dee Rees in the location footage as well. So so we have a number of people being interviewed, as Virgil Williams, how he came to the story, what his background is in terms of working in the industry, and how he discovered or he came across the novel by Hilary Jordan, who also talks about the genesis of the writing of this work, etc. And then I mentioned too that Dee Rees also talks about her engagement with the story and how she also was able to intertwine certain aspects of her own life and her own background and her own family into this. And so there's a story that she recalls from her own from stories that she heard from generations before her own family, about the stenographer and the character of the young girl who wants to be a stenographer early on, or she expresses this early on in the film. And so that is actually taken from Dee Rees's own memories and her own recollections about things that she was told when she was growing up. So that's an interesting detail there. And then we have two aspects of the production there. So really interesting, very detailed, for me anyway, detailed description about the production history of this, and producers knowing producers, and how the story got passed from producer, which is an interesting way in which this film kind of got its genesis, got its start. And it really is it's a further reminder. Again, I'm not in the industry, so I don't know these inner workings of how films get made, but it's a reminder too that it's a real group effort. And so it's all about getting people to connect, and knowing the right person, and having those connections that maybe enable for possibilities along the way. And so we see that a lot of circumstances were brought to the fore that also were, I think, opening up the way for other filmmakers and other producers to come into production, and become a part of this in a really, really powerful and quite vital way, as we find out, because everyone worked 200%, 2000% on this, and it shows in the final product. And then, of course, how Dee Rees became involved in the work, and then again being able to showcase her own genius talent on display. And also we get a sense of how Dee Rees works from producers and also the other people on the crew and also the cast. She has this very wonderful calm demeanor, and you can see it in some of the footage that we see of her on set as well, or on set, on location as well. And it's very calm and very serene. And yet there's such a great sense of command and presence, which is so wonderful. And also she mentioned too about how she really wanted, Dee Rees did, she really wanted to be there on site with the actors, because it was arguably, or not arguably, it was admittedly quite demanding at times, because of the extremities of the weather, because of aspects of, say, being out and being exposed to aspects of nature, that insects and wildlife, and mud, and the roughness of the terrain, etc. And so but Dee Rees wanted to be there on site as well, to share in that experience with the actors and performers, also as a kind of way of showing her trust in them, but also enabling them to trust in her, because they saw that she was willing to share in their discomfort, or their trying to shoot in an earnest way, but still it wasn't the easiest in terms of atmosphere, because of the sort of maybe the climate, etc. But she was willing to be there with them, so I think that was also showing a great deal of trust. And it shows, because the actors that are interviewed here are really showing nothing but the utmost respect for Dee Rees and what it is that she brought to this work. So I think that's a testament to her working style and approach and cinematic aesthetic here. And then aspects too of the performances. I mentioned the greatness of the performances, and so we have we have the key performers being interviewed here: Jason Clarke and Garrett Hedlund and Carey Mulligan, Mary J. Blige, it's Rob Morgan, etc. So and then Jonathan Banks, who plays Pappy. So it's really great supplement all around. Did I say it's approximately 24 minutes? Excuse me, maybe I didn't say that. So it's approximately 24 minutes, but please check it out if you can. So that's the first supplement. Take it when you got it. Next supplement is called Iron Sharpens Iron, The Women Crafting Mudbound. This 2023 documentary features director and co-screenwriter Dee Rees, editor Mako Kamitsuna, composer Tamar Kali, and makeup artist Angie Wells. I should point out that I think Angie Wells, some of her interview also appeared in the earlier supplement as well. But here we have more of her comments, and it's interesting too, because they speak about the opportunities that Dee Rees really afforded to them. I think Tamar Kali mentions how this is her first feature film score. And so Dee Rees really trusted her and entrusted her with this task, and it was demanding in terms of the limitations on time and budget. And Tamar Kali does mention about how there were moments where it was up to the deadline, and so there were moments where it was kind of nerve-wracking, and she admits that. But the end result is spectacular. The music of this is absolutely spectacular. And the string instruments that are used, a kind of melancholy, a kind of echo of a pain that is registering, as well as a delicacy of beauty that's all there in this brilliantly rendered score. So Tamar Kali's score is essential to the success of this work. And then Angie Wells, too, in terms of the makeup artist, talking about details about how things like Garrett Hedlund's mustache and how that there was a challenge, especially considering some of the weather conditions that I was mentioning, because it was all shot on location. So, but also speaking to about her own career and her own, say, struggles in her career. But how she was able to forge her own path and gain a lot of guidance and insight from other people in her say career perspective, and also was able to create a very successful career for herself, including her work with Dee Rees and others here on Mudbound. So that's a wonderful story itself. Dee Rees is also mentioned here, or also interviewed here too, talking about from her perspective and her story about some of the challenges that she acknowledges that she faced and faces being a woman in the industry. And so she does acknowledge those challenges, and that it means that for her, she acknowledges, or she describes how she really needs to work very, very hard. And so but at the end of the day, a work like Mudbound, it really showcases, I think, this brilliant way, the utter, the top of the line talent that is involved across both in front and behind camera, across the board. And that is the people that are participating in this documentary. But Dee Rees too, I mean, it's to Dee Rees's great credit, she does mention in this documentary, and the documentary gives gives the opportunity to credit other participants in the crew who, and then she says, they're not women, but they are very key and integral to the success of this work. And so she does mention David J. Bomba, the production designer, Michael T. Boyd, costume designer as well. So, it's called The Women Crafting Mudbound. And this is also, I think, a very important aspect to the production creation of this film. But there's also an acknowledgement that it's right. There are many people that are working on this film, and so she does acknowledge that as well. And I think in a very great and humble and also all-encompassing and very welcoming way. And then also I should mention to the editor, Mako Kamitsuna is an editor here, and her perspective too is also quite fascinating. She's talking about working as an editor with Dee Rees, and there's a type of magic at play, and utter respect for Dee Rees and what it is she is able to accomplish with this work. And also she mentions too about how at the end of the day, for her, it's about the work. It's about it's about what can be done, and so regardless of a type of, the discussions about maybe gender and opportunities are very important and very relevant, of course. But for in her discussion, it's always about the work, which I think is a really powerful message as well. So various perspectives, various aspects are expressed with these key interviews with the key. With many of the key members of the crew in this documentary, Iron Sharpens Iron, The Women Crafting Mudbound. So this is approximately 16 minutes, so please check this one out if you can as well. Next up, Rachel Morrison. So Rachel Morrison is the director of photography, and she has been mentioned in some of the discussions by Dee Rees in her interviews in the earlier supplements. She's also mentioned by Dee Rees in the commentary track. A really important contributor to this in terms of the photography, the decision to shoot on digital, some of the choices in terms of how to handle the weather and the changes, the almost unexpected nature of the changes in weather, etc. And all that and more are discussed by Rachel Morrison herself in this supplement, which is great. This 2000, and I quote here, this 2017 conversation between filmmaker Jim Hemphill and director of photography Rachel Morrison was filmed at the American Society of Cinematographers in Los Angeles. Here we have, this is approximately 28 minutes. So Jim Hemphill is at a kind of Q&A session or in a sort of he's on stage with her, Rachel Morrison, and so talking about Rachel Morrison's beginnings or project beginnings. It's divided into chapters, which is interesting. So chapter 1 is project beginnings, chapter 2 is continuity challenges, chapter 3 is lenses and aspect ratio, chapter 4 is Jamie's return, chapter 5 2 cameras, hold on, and then chapter 6 is the dance, etc. These chapters are, I think, really interesting and great ways of organizing this wonderful discussion from Rachel Morrison about, for instance, what were some of the inspirational ideas, what were some of the looks what were some of the points of reference that were being relied upon. Eudora Welty is mentioned here and also mentioned elsewhere. I should also mention too, Whitfield LaBelle, etc., and also some photographs, WPA projects were mentioned here. Also, Dee Rees mentions it elsewhere in her interviews in the supplements. So these and other points of reference, photographs, films. Les Blanc is mentioned. To try to establish a kind of alignment about the look and feel of this, to capture historical accuracy within the look of this, which I think is really, really key as well. Also, together with that, there was this discussion I mentioned earlier about the ultimate decision to shoot on digital versus shooting on film, and so I think it's a very honest assessment of what the computation was, what the thinking was, and what the necessities were and the limitations were that led to the decision. But I think it was a really, I mean, the end result is absolutely superb. So. And then there's some more discussion too about testing and aspects of the color palette, how Rachel Morrison up to now didn't necessarily like to use blues and whites, but now blues, but now she I think was very much experimenting with a sense of, for instance, she describes turquoise moonlight, which I think is a lovely phrase, and also how shooting in magic hour in terms of when the sun is about to set, that moment, and shooting during that time. Also, her preference to do a lot of testing now, where maybe she didn't have that feeling earlier in her career, and then also she talks to about specific lenses and aspect ratio and use of gels and combination of gels to try to create a certain color palette look. And then there's an interesting detail about how she likes to work with a shot list rather than a storyboard. At least in the context of her making Mudbound, which is interesting because there was also this idea about there was not a lot of time. It's very limited. And also not just location, but not just schedule, but also the weather could change at any given moment, which would put a spanner in the works of what they planned to film. And so they might be limited in what they could shoot versus what they had planned to shoot. So if they had, say, 5 planned or maybe 5 or 6 planned setups in a given day, maybe the weather changed at lunchtime, thus making them all 6 shots impossible to do within the day. So they had to choose between them what to do given the limited circumstances. So she describes that process and how she really likes it because she knows that there's a kind of not just economy of work, but also a working style, but also knowing that they got it, which I think is an interesting thing. And also there's a kind of liberating feeling that she mentions here. There's the use of multi-cameras. They had 2 cameras that they say. So she was operator on the camera A, and then the B camera where there was another operator that was there. And so at first it was difficult for her, or not difficult, but she says how she wanted to try to give a room for a little bit of freedom, liberating to almost be on the spot and ad lib or improvise to a certain degree. But that also meant too that the A camera and B camera needed to be in sync. And so, what if there was a certain shot that was happening at the moment, and the A camera was doing one thing, but if the B camera was doing something else that was out of sync with what the A camera was doing, then it couldn't be, the footage couldn't be integral to each other. So Rachel Morrison describes at first how she had to put a monitor on her camera to to monitor what the other camera was doing, at least during the first week or so. But then she understood, and she realized that yes, actually they are working very much in sync without necessarily having to align in that way. So she took the monitor off and let the B camera do what it is that they wanted to do. So I think that's a really lovely a gesture that Rachel Morrison is showing, just showing the faith that she has in the other camera and other camera operators that are working with her. And it works wonders too, because you don't see any sense of disorientation or any sense of imbalance when you cut from one perspective to another perspective within the same scene of the film. It all feels so organic. So well done. And to know that some of those shots maybe were, some aspects were done on maybe with a sense of spontaneity at the moment, which I think is also quite wonderful indeed. And then also there's this idea of knowing who to follow in a given moment. Again, considerations of limitations of time meant that she couldn't necessarily get all the quote unquote coverage, etc. So there was a way in which certain scenes were shot, but knowing who to follow. I mean, there's a sequence that is exemplary of this, about when Jamie comes home after serving in the war, and then greeting everyone at the household, Pappy and the kids, and then Henry, and then Laura on the front porch there. But just knowing who to follow in this given moment, because so many things are happening at once. See all the character reactions, in particular how Henry reacts, how Pappy reacts, how Laura reacts at Jamie's return. So seeing all these little details, but knowing who to follow, again, that shows a certain sense of spontaneity on the spot, and how the camera is used and operated, but also knowing that when we watch the film Mudbound again after having this knowledge, we realize that we have to look at everything in the frame, which is brilliant. Oh, it's so great. And then so these and other points I think are brought up so well. Oh, and also lighting. So she talks to about lighting and limitations of lighting budget, and there's some on location scenes. For instance, there's a scene involving a train station where she had to use so much light because it was actually, I think, an old bank building that was used, but it was standing in for the train station scene, and so it's having to shoot so much light through the large windows, and this is an actual building, and then with so many extras, etc. And so it's one of the quote unquote epic shots of the film, end quote. And it almost, she mentions how she spent a lot of her lighting budget on these shots alone, and so there was a bit of a worry on the part of the producer, but she had to assuage their concerns and let them know that no, it's okay, because we have it all planned out, and trying to use lenses in order to affect a certain sense of, say, natural light in some of the dark scenes, or some of the scenes at nighttime, which I think is really great. Also, trying to accentuate the use of wallpaper and how that affects lighting as well. There's a scene involving a dance early on, and how she describes how her collaboration with the set decorator and production designer to try to choose the tone of the color of the wallpaper really gave a certain tenor to the lighting scheme that was being used, and also an economy of shooting. In other words, as something was being shot, another setup was being had to prepare for the next to the next stop in terms of the shooting schedule. So that type of brevity of economy, as well as a collaboration with various other artists as well, I think is great conversation. I'm very, very happy with the conversation. I learned so much. I'm not a cinematographer. I'm not a filmmaker. I'm not an artist. So a lot of this stuff sometimes can go over my head. But in this discussion here, it's done so well, and even when it hits certain technical points, it's done in a way that's still very digestible and very understandable, even to a lay person like myself. So well done for this 2017 conversation with Rachel Morrison. It's really, really great. And that's not all, because then we have David J. Bomba. This interview with production designer David J. Bomba was recorded exclusively for the Criterion Collection in October 2023. So this interview with David J. Bomba is approximately 17 minutes. And he speaks too about his own background. He in his own upbringing from New Orleans and the South, and so he also talks about some of his own frames of reference. I mentioned earlier about how Dee Rees and Rachel Morrison were talking about certain frames of reference, certain photographs that were very important in terms of their own alignment of the look and feel of the film. And David J. Bombam also mentions to Eudora Welty. So this is and Home Before Dark, a very famous photograph. And so how this not only is very much in keeping with maybe his work and aesthetic and choices as a production designer in his work in Mudbound, but also in his work in other films in his own filmography. So, and then also some details and anecdotes about finding the property itself that's used for the actual location. Some details too about, I mentioned shooting in Louisiana for a story that takes place in Mississippi. And so, but there are certain maybe aspects of historical preservation that and details of mid 20th century life that needed to be shown. And so this, I think the Louisiana locations really lend itself very nicely to that, according to David Bomba and also Dee Rees, etc. But he mentions here a detail about the farming that was actually used, sugarcane farming versus, wheat farming. This is very different, etc. So even these details and how they look and register on film, these are, and other considerations needed to be made in order to make the final choices about what locations to decide upon. So, and then also using the actual house structures themselves and having to move them, which is something that we mentioned earlier. Whitfield LaBelle as another reference point, which is something that Dee Rees brought to the table, and sort of the wood based artwork, and then the idea too of contrasting colors and how that's reflected in the production design and the like. So this is a really great discussion as well. So wow, David J. Bomba. This is approximately 17 minutes, so please check this out if you can. And then we have we'll have one teaser and then one trailer, and that rounds out the wealth of supplements that's included. So that's the supplements for Mudbound, the Criterion release. And so I think there's a lot here. There's really a lot here, and a number of Criterion exclusive supplements at that, as well as the commentary track. So there is so much on display here, and you learn so much. There's a kind of wealth and layering of detail in terms of how this film was made. So I think overall, a fabulous set of supplements and a fabulous packed stack of supplements, including a new commentary track to greet us for those who have this Blu-ray release from Criterion. So I think highly recommended on that point alone. And then let's now speak about some of the other contours of the packaging and the design. I should point out this great cover art. I love this cover art. There's a type of patchwork quality, and the tone, the earth tones, which is also something that Dee Rees and Rachel Morrison and others were mentioning, to how they wanted to capture the earth tones, the importance of the mud and the soil and the earth, and capturing the brown color palette, etc. And that's also, I think, emblematic in this choice in terms of the cover art design too. I love this, and the patchwork quality here as well, where each character gets its own artistic rendering here, is also indicative, I think, of the way in which this is very much an ensemble, and we have multi-perspectives that are joined, maybe for better or for worse, in the context of the earth, soil, and mud. So Mudbound, I think that's really wonderfully depicted here as a kind of mosaic. And let me point out your production credits: art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman; cover art Princeton Nana, and designer Eric Skillman; art production coordinator William Breeze; and art assistant Julie Sussman. So I think this is really great, really great stuff. And that's not all, because we have the booklet as well, and it's a staple booklet. I'm very happy about this, the staple booklet, because it allows for the robustness of pages, etc. And this is no exception to that in my view. This is wonderful. It's got a number of pictures cast and crew page early on in the booklet, but then we have a great essay starting on page 2 and ending on page 15 of by Danielle Amir Jackson, which is called Friendship, Motherhood, and Redemptive Softness. This is a delight to read. This is so informative, so well written. Oh, and please, of course, watch the film first before you read the essay, because it does go into certain details about the plot. And so I think watching the film, I think, will benefit one greatly in reading the essay. And it's a great essay. Touches upon aspects of the look and aesthetic feel and the literary quality of this film overall. So Eudora Welty is mentioned. Flannery O'Connor is mentioned, William Faulkner, of course, etc. So some of the touchstone points, some of the points of reference, both in a visual style sense, historical sense, and literary sense. It's all intertwined within this single work that is Mudbound. And then also the kind of use of historical reference points as well. I mentioned that there's an interesting detail that's mentioned about the Jackson family, the distinction between sharecroppers and share tenants as well, which I didn't appreciate upon my watch of the film. So this is also a point, or an example of how this essay is very illuminating for me. And then also some other reference points in terms of, for instance, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter or To Kill a Mockingbird, which are also very key reference points as well as the discussion of the film itself, some of the key core thematic concerns, the arcs of the characters, the importance of this work as a Dee Rees work, etc., and the way that it works with the underlying novel, Hilary Jordan's great novel on the one hand, and also takes certain adaptation aspects to it as well. So it's an overall encompassing dynamic essay. So please check this out if you can. It's really wonderful. Friendship, Motherhood, and Redemptive Softness. So that's part of this great booklet. So this is a Criterion release that has a staple booklet. It is something that is a film from a filmmaker that is so wonderful and expert in terms of the cinematic craft and artistic qualities. It's a great film. As far as the Criterion release is concerned, it looks and sounds great. It has so many supplements, a staple booklet. My goodness, this is a really great one indeed. So I was overall quite impressed and very taken with this, and not just because of the packaging and physical media qualities to this release, which I think are very high, but also because of the opportunity to be able to watch or rewatch or revisit this film, but also in a way that makes me or enables me to learn so much more about its contours, its folds, and its complexities, its richness, via this the commentary track and the supplements. And that's all shining wonderful attention and a great, wonderful and deserved attention to the work of Dee Rees, and one such important, compelling work being this film, which is Mudbound. So, my dear friends, that's it as far as my discussion of this great Criterion release of Dee Rees' film Mudbound. So what do you think? Have you seen this film? Please feel free to let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. As always, I'm very much interested to hear what it is you have to say. But until the next video, my dear friends, please continue to be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Mudbound, including other works by Dee Rees, including other films in the Criterion Collection, and beyond. So until the next video, please continue to stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.